All right, we're going to wrap up Georgia's win over the Cats. It was a really cold night. I'm going to tell you right now that this was one of those games that it felt like you just needed to get out of there. There wasn't a ton impressive about the game. I thought that, um, as soon as Georgia went up 9-0, it was going to be tricky for Kentucky to win. I talked about this in Legge's thoughts, and we talked about it in Riding Home. There is going to be a lot of discussion about going for it at 4th and 1, right on top of the goal line there when you're up 16-0. Kicking the field goal there puts the game at 19-0 and all but over. I think that I would have kicked it and just moved on to the next game. I understand where Kirby's coming from, particularly in this game. I would not do that in a terminal game. In a terminal game, I would want to go up 3 scores. His This is me thinking for him. I don't know, but my suspicion is he said, "Well, listen, I've got a team here that I'm trying to get going, and I feel like we're ascending. I want to get this yard. I'm frustrated. I want them to prove to me that they can get this yard. They didn't get it, and the bootleg was there. And Bob Stoops talked about that on his post game, saying that they simply were not going to allow Georgia to go through the middle. So you know, coaches sometimes uh, have reasons for doing what they're doing. I don't think that was an irrational decision, but again, if you're up 16-0 on Ohio State in the fourth quarter of the national championship game, you need to kick the field goal there. I know I don't know as much about football as Kirby does, and I get that, but 3 scores, that Kentucky team couldn't do anything. And it was a minor miracle they got that 99-yard drive. And maybe that was why, he did that. So I don't want to over focus on that because that was one play in a game, but it was an important game, an important play. Georgia really dominated Kentucky. And, I'm in North Georgia right now, and it's not nearly as cold as it was last night. It was 36 degrees. That is the coldest game on record that I've seen that Georgia's played. So the only thing that could approach as bad as last night was the 2000 Mississippi game where it was extremely cold and raining in Sanford Stadium. I don't know if y'all remember that game or not. You could not function out there. Now, some of y'all watch these videos and you say, "Well, you're making excuses for him." Bitch, I don't make excuses. I tell you what reality is, and it's just not functional out there. And get past your wanting Georgia to play unbelievable and live in reality a little bit. The defense played outstanding. Georgia's run game was awesome. They just couldn't throw the ball. And for the record, Kentucky couldn't throw the ball. Well, I wonder why that was. Because when you can't grip a football, you can't throw it. Everything were these sidearm throws. The one ball that Stetson threw just looked like the deep ball just looked like it. I mean, was an injured bird. Uh, that's what the wind was like up there. It was not. It was windy on the field for sure, but it wasn't. It was when you got it in the air where it felt like there were issues. The punts. So Kirby, I think, just said, "Hey, we feel like we're better than them in a phone booth. We're going to play in a phone booth." They did, and they won. The 40,000-foot view of this is that um, last night, I was about to say today, the Dog Post crew watched all these games except Ohio State. And when you turn the TV on and you're watching Tennessee get smashed by South Carolina, uh, and it really more than that, Michigan having to hold on and not hold on, but steal a win away. How about Ohio State basically doing the same thing, just not looking good? You could say the same thing about LSU for the first half. Um, you know, TCU's win yesterday was insane. I mean, they're clearly living right. But Georgia was the best looking team yesterday. That's the craziest part. Is as blah as they were, um, nobody in the top 10 had a good Clemson. I mean, Clemson looked good. If you want to call it that, Miami is horrible. So and we know what Clemson is. So I think there are some games that you have to understand. Alabama was not great yesterday. Um, there are some games where you just need to leave. Like you're going to win the game, and that's it. Like we're not trying to celebrate. I mean, the guys after the game, and you see this in our post game videos. You know, the guys in Kentucky, they had a lot to say to each other in a positive way. There was a lot of talk. These two teams seem to respect one another more than any other team that I've seen Georgia. You know, maybe the Gators, I guess, but this was, you know, there was a lot of congratulatory stuff, and then the players they were ready to leave. Kenny McIntosh was I mean he had a huge night. He was eager to go home. So this is one of those games where you win because the alternative would have been then the pressure's really on for these next two games. Georgia Tech beat North Carolina. I mean I don't that doesn't make sense in this world, but it happened because ACC. But you have to take all these games seriously. Georgia took Kentucky seriously, but the conditions were just so bad. And the point I was trying to make a second ago was you just never, yeah, I mean, this season, Georgia's not going to play a game like this again where it's that bitterly cold. 36 degrees is not, it is, and I say that with, I'm not throwing a football and I'm not engaging with another person, right? I'm not running, but I am doing a function on the field. I'm not in the press box typing with my fingers. I'm using my hands on cameras. And so I'm trying to move around. It was really hard last night to do that. And on the field, when you talked off the record, when you spoke off the record with the Georgia players, it was hard. It was not easy to function out there, but they got the job done. And looking backwards at this game is just you're derelict in your fan duty by doing that. There's just nothing you're going to get out of it. I think maybe defensively, but when you move forward and look ahead of Georgia Tech, the way they play does not really correlate with the way Kentucky is. LSU somewhat, but not really. I mean, Brian Kelly has a pretty good offensive structure the way that Kentucky does. But Ohio State, Texas Christian, Michigan, certainly, a lot of these teams that are out there, they play more like Mississippi State than they do Kentucky. And I do think one thing I wanted to touch on is Kirby's correct in saying, hey, look, y'all, we just did a 4-game stretch, the likes of which, he said is the worst he's ever seen. I don't I don't know. I'd have to go back and look, but we knew at Dog Post because of the travel that this was going to be pretty bad, and um, the caliber of team was another thing. You were talking about a huge rivalry game with the Gators, then a matchup of number one team, the most watched game in college football this season so far. It will probably wind up number two behind Ohio State and Michigan, Tennessee, Georgia, a road night game in bitter cold against a pass happy team in state. Um, none of the, I mean, State and Tennessee, somewhat similar, I guess, not really necessarily. I mean, you don't have the same type of quarterback. The challenges at the end of this season have been pretty dramatic for Georgia, but when you go through a stretch of playing, oh gosh, I can't remember what would have been the easy games against Kent State, Missouri, Auburn, and Vanderbilt. They had two really lopsided wins there. One pretty decisive one against Kent State, and one win where you were driving to go up 11 at the end of the fourth quarter. Um, Georgia still has only been tested really once this fourth quarter. Yesterday, it's hard to say they were tested in the fourth quarter. That's when Kentucky scored their only touchdown. But as soon as they didn't get that 2-point conversion, it just was so hard to imagine Kentucky to continue to score when they'd not scored all day. Georgia's defense really played well. Moving forward, looking at where we go from here, this is a Georgia team that is fully capable of winning the national championship. What they're not capable of is playing perfect. That's not going to happen. Last night proved that it's better, yesterday, excuse me, proved that it's better to be steady than to be outstanding. And um, if Ohio State plays the way they did yesterday, if Michigan plays the way they did yesterday, if TCU plays the way they did yesterday, they will not beat Georgia. They'll lose. If Georgia plays the way they did yesterday, they'll probably win the national championship. And I'm talking about in comparatively speaking to the way the other teams played yesterday. We've seen Ohio State have a hard time this season on a couple of occasions. Okay. We've seen Michigan, you know, that this is, that you get challenged. Texas Christian, we've seen this the entire time. Now USC, that game last night against UCLA was the same game we've watched them play over and over and over again. They have a hard time stopping people. If you're going to be dependent on Caleb Williams to take you win the national championship, he might be able to do it. But a quarterback's got to be pretty exceptional these days to beat Georgia. And he's exceptional. He is exceptional for sure. CJ Stroud is exceptional for sure. Michigan, TCU, I think now that I talk it out, it might be Georgia, TCU, it might be Georgia, Ohio State, and SC. The problem for Ohio State is they don't match up hot with Michigan. But Michigan cannot play like they did yesterday on offense. They're used to this weather. They're used to functioning that way. And now with the running back hurt, you watch Hendon Hooker get hurt. These guys work constantly, and it is a life lesson, but it still doesn't take away from the, I don't know about sadness, but it seems unfair when guys get hurt. But bad things happen in life. I mean, I can explain these things to you, and you have to move it forward. So that was disappointing, to see Hendon Hooker get hurt like that, to see the running back at Michigan get hurt. And then just look at the tragedy in Virginia this week. Those two things do not compare to the other. And, life most of the time moves on. And unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't. And that's the hard part. But one of my closest friends that I've lost not that long ago, he is a huge South Carolina fan, and I know that he was going nuts last night watching that game. He would have done his whole giant killers routine that he tries to pull off from time to time. He would be, my poor wife, who was a Clemson fan, would be getting texts this morning about Clem Tech and Hate Week and Taters this and Taters that, and that is one of the all-time wins for South Carolina. Period. I mean, they didn't just beat Tennessee; they throttled them. And but would you really want to be South Carolina? With a quarterback who cannot function consistently. It is about being consistent. And you've got Jack Panesley. You've got a defense. And when you can't do what you want to do, throwing the ball to Ladd McConkey and missing wide open Darnell, I mean, that Stetson, that cannot, like, that's got to be a touchdown. So there were plays to be had. The short, the red zone or short yardage, it was just not good tonight or last night. I'm sorry. We got back pretty quick last night because we got out of there at 8 o'clock, and that's why I'm doing Leggy Sauce in the morning. But no fumbles. The interception was not great because it really felt like Georgia was about to close that game out. But 363 yards in those conditions is perfectly fine. But winning the run game by 150 something yards, that's why Georgia won. It felt like Kentucky, was running the ball enough to be effective, and it really did. And I'm certain Kirby Smart is happy to never see Chris Rodriguez again. I mean, I thought Keelee's pick was, a great play by him. It was a bad throw by Will Levis. I didn't see it until post game. And you cannot let somebody like Kelee Ringo get going. That's 2 picks in the end zone now in 3 games for Kelee, and he narrowly, he almost returned that for a touchdown, and that would have been really tough to come back from for Kentucky. But as it turns out, one touchdown and a field goal was enough for Georgia. You would like to see more points. I think we're going to see that against Tech. I thought Georgia would really hammer Kentucky. They didn't on the scoreboard. On the field, it was a pretty solid beating. I mean, Kentucky just couldn't move the ball. We're going to go to our nifty drive chart. The first drive for the Cats, of course, a really were the first two drives. I mean, it was the first two drives were impressive. 24 yards for 24 plays, excuse me, for I'm just doing the math very quickly. 121 yards, and then they went for on fourth down, got turned away. Interception in the end zone. That was 15 minutes of the first 16 minutes of the first half, and then Georgia took over, and it was three and out, three and out, three and out, and then the game was kind of too far away for Kentucky to win. So, but this is the team. This is a team that was sort of more effective against Georgia's defense than anybody else that I can remember, and they scored a touchdown. Maybe Missouri was. I'm talking about driving the ball. So I think you don't. I mean, if you want to watch this game over, you can. It just is not anything you're going to see in the future. It's a little bit like watching, Georgia play Paul Johnson's Georgia Tech. There's no reason to watch it. It's just not a normal game. And offensively, Georgia, it wasn't bad. I mean, you look at the plays. 13 for 58, 10 for 47, 11 for 46. The interception, happened when they were at midfield. Then the touchdown what was that in the third quarter? That was on an 8-play drive. There was only one drive where Georgia had fewer than 5 plays. So I thought it was a perfectly adequate win. I don't think it was anything you're going to think about. And there are a lot of games like that in national championship, SEC championship seasons. Georgia needs to get it together a little bit, but we'll see you from Athens on Saturday.